What if I told you that the most powerful story ever told about unconditional love takes less than 10 minutes to read, but has been transforming lives for over 2,000 years? Today we're diving deep into one of Jesus's most beloved parables, the story of the prodigal son. And I promise you that by the end of this video, you'll understand why this ancient tale still speaks directly to the deepest longings of the human heart. Picture this scene with me. A wealthy father has two sons. The younger one approaches his dad one day and makes a request that would have been absolutely shocking in ancient Middle Eastern culture. He asks for his inheritance while his father is still alive. In that society, this was essentially saying to your father, "I wish you were dead. I want what's coming to me when you die, and I want it now." Here's where the story gets interesting. Instead of flying into a rage or disowning his son, the father does something unthinkable. He grants the request. He divides his property between his two sons, giving the younger one his portion. Luke chapter 15 verse 12 tells us, "And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me.' And he divided unto them his living." Now imagine being that father. Your son has just delivered the ultimate insult, and you respond with generosity. This isn't weakness. This is love so radical that it defies human logic. The father could have said no. He had every right to say no. But he chose to honor his son's free will, even knowing it would lead to heartbreak. Within days, maybe even hours, the younger son gathered everything he owned and set off for a distant country. The Greek word used here suggests he left with desperate haste, like someone fleeing a crime scene. He couldn't get away fast enough from the love and security of his father's house. And don't we see this pattern repeated in our world today? How many of us have walked away from the very things that were meant to protect and provide for us? How many teenagers have slammed doors and declared they don't need their parents? How many adults have turned their backs on faith, on family, on the values they were raised with? Convinced that real life, real freedom, real happiness exists somewhere else, anywhere else but where they are? The younger son thought he knew what he wanted. Independence, adventure, the chance to make his own rules and live life on his own terms. So he took his father's hard-earned wealth and headed for the bright lights of the big city. For a while, it seemed like he'd made the right choice. Luke 15:13 says, "And not many days after the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living." The word for riotous living here literally means living wildly without restraint. This wasn't just partying. This was a complete abandonment of everything he'd been taught about how to live. He threw money around like it would never run out. He surrounded himself with fair-weather friends who were more than happy to help him spend his inheritance. Every night was a celebration, every day a new adventure. But here's the thing about running away from love. Eventually, you run out of road. The money dried up, as money always does when you're living without wisdom or restraint. Worse yet, a severe famine struck the land. Suddenly, the party was over, and the friends disappeared faster than his bank account. Luke 15:14 tells us, "And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want." Have you ever experienced that moment when the bottom falls out of your carefully constructed world? When the thing you thought would give you freedom becomes your prison? When the choices that seemed so right lead you to a place so wrong that you barely recognize yourself? This young man went from being the life of the party to being desperate for any kind of work just to survive. The only job he could find was feeding pigs, which for a Jewish young man was about as degrading as it gets. Pigs were considered unclean animals. To work with them meant becoming ceremonially unclean himself. He had fallen so far that he was literally living among the animals, and the text tells us he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. Think about that image for a moment. A young man who once had everything, who once wore fine clothes and ate at his father's table, now envying the slop being fed to pigs. This is what happens when we mistake freedom for rebellion, when we confuse independence with isolation, when we think we can build a meaningful life by running away from love. But it's in this moment of absolute desperation that something beautiful happens. Luke 15:17 says, "And when he came to himself, he said, 'How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger?'" The phrase "came to himself" is crucial. It suggests he had been living outside of himself, outside of his true identity. He had been playing a role, pretending to be someone he wasn't. Now, sitting in the mud with the pigs, he remembered who he really was. Not just anyone, but his father's son. Even the hired servants in his father's house lived better than he was living now. And for the first time since he'd left home, he allowed himself to remember what he'd walked away from. Not just comfort and security, but love. Unconditional, unwavering, unearned love. This is the moment of decision that changes everything. The son makes a choice that requires tremendous humility. He decides to go home, not as a son expecting to be welcomed back with open arms, but as a servant hoping to be accepted as hired help. Listen to his planned speech in Luke 15:18 and 19. "I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants." Notice what he's prepared to do. He's ready to take full responsibility for his choices. He's not making excuses or blaming circumstances. He's not trying to minimize his failures or explain them away. He simply says, "I have sinned." These three words represent one of the most powerful moments in all of human experience, the moment when we stop running from our mistakes and turn toward grace. But here's where the story takes a turn that still brings people to tears after 2,000 years. While the son was still a long way off, while he was still rehearsing his speech and steeling himself for rejection, his father saw him coming. The text in Luke 15:20 says, "But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him." Let me paint this picture for you. In Middle Eastern culture, older men didn't run. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't proper. But this father hiked up his robes and ran toward his son like a young man. He didn't wait for an explanation. He didn't demand an apology first. He didn't even wait for his son to reach the house. The moment he spotted that familiar figure in the distance, he took off running. Can you imagine what that must have looked like to the neighbors? Can you imagine what it felt like to the son? He's walking slowly, probably rehearsing his speech one more time, maybe even considering turning around because the shame feels too heavy. And then he looks up and sees his father running toward him, arms wide open, with joy and relief written all over his face. The father reached his son and embraced him before the boy could even get his speech out. The kiss mentioned here isn't a polite peck on the cheek. It's the Greek word that suggests repeated, passionate kisses of joy and welcome. This father was overwhelmed with happiness at his son's return. And when the son finally managed to stammer out his prepared confession, the father wasn't even listening to the part about becoming a servant. Instead, he immediately turned to his servants and began issuing orders that showed everyone watching exactly how he viewed this returning son. But the father said to his servants, "Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry." That's Luke 15:22 and 23. Every single item the father called for had symbolic meaning. The best robe wasn't just any robe, it was the father's own ceremonial robe, the one reserved for the most honored guest. Putting it on his son was a public declaration that he was not returning as a servant, but being restored to his full position as a beloved child. The ring wasn't jewelry. It was a signet ring bearing the family seal, giving the son authority to conduct business on behalf of the family. The shoes might seem like a small detail, but in that culture, slaves went barefoot while sons wore shoes. And the fatted calf, well, that was the calf being saved for the most special of occasions. Killing it meant this wasn't just a quiet family dinner. This was going to be a celebration that the entire community would be invited to join. The father's reasoning for this extravagant celebration is stated in verse 24. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Notice the father doesn't say my son was bad, and now he's good. He doesn't say my son was rebellious, and now he's obedient. He says my son was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found. This is how love sees us, not primarily as good or bad, obedient or rebellious, successful or failing, but as alive or dead, found or lost. The father's joy isn't based on his son's performance, but on his presence. He's not celebrating because his son has proven himself worthy of love. He's celebrating because love has been reunited with its object. But the story doesn't end with this beautiful reunion scene. There's another son, remember? The older brother has been working faithfully in the fields all these years. He's done everything right, followed every rule, met every expectation. And when he comes home to find a party in full swing, celebrating the return of his rebellious brother, he's not happy about it. Luke 15:25-28 gives us his reaction. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. The older son's anger reveals something that might be uncomfortable for us to acknowledge. It's possible to live in the Father's house and still be far from the Father's heart. It's possible to do all the right things for all the wrong reasons. This older son had never left physically, but emotionally and spiritually, he was just as distant from his father as his younger brother had ever been. His complaint in verses 29 and 30 shows us his heart. And he answering said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment. And yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. Did you catch that? He doesn't say my brother came home. He says this thy son as if he's disowning his own sibling. He's kept score of his good behavior and his brother's bad behavior, and he's angry that grace doesn't seem to work like a reward system. He's been serving his father, but it turns out he's been serving for the wrong reasons. Not out of love, but out of duty. Not from gratitude, but from a sense of obligation and expectation of reward. How often do we find ourselves in the older brother's position? Resentful when others receive grace we feel they haven't earned. Angry when forgiveness comes too easily to people we believe should have to work harder for it. Bitter when love is freely given to those who seem less deserving. The older brother's anger reveals the condition of his own heart, and it's not as pretty as his perfect behavior might suggest. But watch how the father responds to this second son's rebellion. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't point out the older son's self-righteousness or lecture him about gratitude. Instead, he goes out to find him, just like he ran to meet the younger son. And he speaks to him with the same love and tenderness, calling him son and gently correcting his perspective. The Father's response in Luke 15:31 and 32 is both gentle and profound. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Notice the father reminds the older son of his secure position. You are ever with me. All that I have is yours. The father's love for the returning son doesn't diminish his love for the faithful son. Love multiplies rather than divides. The father has enough love for both sons, enough celebration for every homecoming, enough grace for every need. But the story ends without telling us how the older son responds. We don't know if he swallows his pride and joins the celebration, or if he remains outside, sulking in his self-righteousness. And that's intentional. Jesus left the ending open because the story is still being written. In every generation, in every family, in every human heart, people are still choosing between the celebration of grace and the isolation of pride. This parable speaks to something universal in human experience. We all know what it feels like to be the younger son at some point in our lives. We've all made choices that took us far from where we knew we belonged. We've all experienced the consequences of thinking we knew better than wisdom, better than love, better than the voices that tried to guide us toward what was good for us. Maybe your far country wasn't a literal place, but an emotional distance. Maybe you didn't spend money recklessly, but you spent years, relationships, opportunities, or trust recklessly. Maybe you didn't end up feeding pigs, but you found yourself in situations that left you wondering how you got so far from the person you used to be or the person you wanted to become. And we've probably all been the older brother at some point too. Keeping score of our good behavior while watching others seem to get away with things we would never do. Feeling like our faithfulness goes unnoticed while others' failures get all the attention. Struggling with resentment when grace comes too easily to people we think should have to earn it the hard way. But the beauty of this story is that it's ultimately not about either son's behavior. It's about the father's character. It's about love that doesn't change based on performance. It's about a welcome that doesn't depend on worthiness. It's about a celebration that erupts not when we finally get our lives together, but when we finally come home. The father in this story represents God's heart toward us, not the distant, angry, judgmental deity that many people imagine, but a father who watches the horizon for our return, who runs to meet us when we're still far off, who clothes us with honor we haven't earned and celebrates our presence with joy we can't fathom. This is the scandalous nature of grace. It doesn't make sense from a human perspective. We're used to earning our way, proving our worth, working for acceptance. But the Father's love operates by different mathematics. It's not based on what we've done, but on whose we are. We are His children, and that identity doesn't change based on our location or our behavior. First, John chapter 3, verse 1 puts it beautifully. Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. This isn't love we earn through good behavior or lose through bad choices. This is love bestowed, given freely, lavishly, without reservation. But here's what makes this story even more powerful. It's not just a nice tale about forgiveness. It's Jesus' way of explaining why He came. The religious leaders of His day were scandalized by the way Jesus welcomed sinners and outcasts. They couldn't understand why He would eat with tax collectors and prostitutes, why He would show kindness to people they considered unworthy of God's attention. So Jesus told them this story to explain the heart of God. Every person sitting in the pig pen of their own poor choices is welcome to come home. Every older brother standing in the field of their own righteousness is invited to join the celebration. The Father's house is big enough for all of us, and his love is strong enough to transform any heart that's willing to receive it. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 tells us, "But God commendeth his love toward us, in that, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." We don't have to clean ourselves up before we come to God. We don't have to prove we're worthy of love before love reaches out to us. While we were still in our far country, still covered in the mud of our poor choices, still rehearsing speeches about why we might possibly deserve a second chance, God was already running toward us with open arms. The cross of Jesus Christ is the ultimate expression of the Father's heart in this parable. It's God saying, "I love you so much that I'll pay any price to bring you home. I'll sacrifice anything to restore our relationship. There is no distance you can travel, no mistake you can make, no shame you can carry that will keep me from running toward you the moment you turn in my direction." But like the older brother, we have a choice to make. We can stand outside the celebration, counting up all the reasons why grace isn't fair, all the ways that unconditional love doesn't make sense, all the arguments for why some people deserve celebration more than others. Or we can lay down our pride, walk through those doors, and join the party. Because here's what the older brother missed, and what we often miss too. The celebration isn't just for the one who returned home. It's for everyone who recognizes that home is where we all belong. Every time someone comes home to the Father's love, it's a reminder that home exists for all of us. Every prodigal's return is proof that the way back is always open. The door is always unlocked. The light is always on. If you're watching this video and you recognize yourself in the younger son's story, I want you to know that the Father is watching for you. He's not waiting for you to get your life completely together before you come home. He's not requiring you to prove you've learned your lesson or demonstrate that you've changed before he'll welcome you back. He's running toward you right now, in this moment, with the robe and the ring and the celebration ready. Your speech about unworthiness is prepared, but he's not even listening to that part. He's too busy rejoicing that his child has come home. Whatever far country you've been living in, whatever pig pen you found yourself in, whatever shame you're carrying, it's not stronger than his love. It's not bigger than his grace. It's not more permanent than his forgiveness. And if you see yourself in the older brother, if you've been faithfully serving but struggling with resentment, if you've been keeping score and feeling like grace isn't fair, the Father's heart is big enough for you too. Your faithful service matters to him, but not because it earns his love. It matters because it flows from his love. You don't have to earn your place in his affection. You already have it. You always have. The Father is saying to you what he said to the older son, "All that I have is yours. You are ever with me." The celebration of someone else's homecoming doesn't diminish your value or your place in the family. There's room for everyone at the Father's table, and there's enough love to go around. This story that Jesus told 2,000 years ago is still being lived out today in living rooms and hospital rooms, in churches and courtrooms, in coffee shops and boardrooms, wherever human hearts are wrestling with questions of love and forgiveness and belonging. The Father is still watching the horizon. The door is still open. The celebration is still ready to begin. The question isn't whether you're worthy of coming home. The question is whether you'll accept the invitation that's already been extended. The Father's love is unshakable, unchanging, and unconditional. It's not based on your performance, your past, or your promises about the future. It's based on his character, his heart, his decision to call you his own. So come home, not when you're ready, not when you've figured it all out, not when you feel worthy. Come home now just as you are, with everything you've done and everything you've failed to do, and discover for yourself the unshakable love of the Father who has been waiting for you all along. The prodigal son's story ends with a celebration, but your story is still being written. What will your next chapter say about the power of love to transform, restore, and welcome home? The father is waiting to find out, and he's ready to run toward you with arms wide open, no matter how long you've been away.